Hey everyone, I am here with Miguel Aragoncillo. He is a brilliant practitioner based out of Boston. And Miguel, you stood out to me immediately when we met at the Functional Range Systems Spine Seminar in Pasadena at Lopes Clinic, because I overheard you telling someone that you flew in and had like 0 hours of sleep. You're all the way from the Northeast. And then we were sitting next to each other at lunch. And you said this was your first FRS seminar. I was very much in the gauntlet of I want to knock out FRS and learn everything I can as fast as possible. So it was my fourth seminar total and my second FR seminar specifically. And I was in very much learn mode. And I was in kind of a processing and a learn mode. And I mentioned something as we were talking about the system. And I said that functional range release is really just hyper localized FRC. And you responded, how so? And in that moment, I realized that I was not in explain or present mode whatsoever. And so I'm pretty sure that I gave the worst possible explanation of how you can actually view functional range release as hyperlocalized FRC. And I was like, I hope I didn't just totally ruin FRS or misrepresent, give forth a bad representation of the type of person who is seeking out FRS to this guy I just met. So I'm glad that you continued down the FRS rabbit hole. And we've been talking a little bit about the most recent seminar we both attended, different seminars, but the same topic for the internal strength model. But before we get into FRS, and I'm sure we'll talk about PRI because that's been a foundation of what you do for a while now, I don't actually know exactly the work context that you're in. So if you would share with me kind of, you're not cookie cutter in how you work with people, and you're also not cookie cutter in kind of how your work is set up. I know you're at multiple locations. I don't know if you actually work for someone or like if you contract. So if you would just give me an idea of kind of what's your setup, who you work with, and what your day-to-day looks like, as I'm sure no 2 days are exactly the same.
Yeah, for sure. It's always evolving in the context of where I am, trying to, the population that I'm trying to work with. It's always evolving. Primarily, I'd like to work with athletes, individuals that pay the bills, however, are mostly the general population adults. And I find that, if you're any respectable practitioner, you're not only working with one type of individual. You're going to be working with whomever, unless, of course, you're in the, pro sports realm side of things. Anyway, my current work situation is I'm a strength coach and manual therapist. I think like yourself as well. And
Yes.
And I am working in 3 different locations. Used to be more or less, depends on what's happening in the year. It's a little bit hectic for myself, hectic in a good way, right? Mornings I'm in Boston, like the actual city of Boston, not like when somebody says, oh, I'm in Boston, but really you're half an hour outside of Boston. And then I do travel about half an hour to 40 minutes outside of the city to work with athletes at another facility, mostly the youth athletes from anywhere from 12 to 18 pro levels beyond as well. And then after that, I also do working with a different company and contracted under another company as well, working with a lot with different runners and endurance athletes. Most recently just did a handful of things with the Boston Marathon, not with the BAA, Boston Athletics Association, but the private teams that would be showing up to the Boston Marathon, for example. So that was fun, working with a lot of different endurance athletes there, working more on the manual therapy side of things. So I'm doing a handful. If there was a time allocation or ratio, if you will, I'd say it's about 60-40 coaching versus manual therapy. Used to be definitely 100 to 0 way before. and it kind of transitioned after that. So and then I also do online stuff. So I'm not just sitting twiddling my thumbs throughout my day. So
100%. So you are also very interesting to me because uh, you are similar to me in the sense that we are not doctors of physical therapy and we don't pretend to be. Obviously, we're not MDs, and we don't pretend to be. We would have some legal issues on our hand if we were presenting as that. But you CSCS, correct?
Mhm.
So you're a real strength coach. I didn't even do CSCS. I just went CPT. I was actually studying for CSCS, and I was like, this won't really give me access to anyone that I'm trying to target. So I just went with the cheaper, like online CPT to get that bare minimum entry point into being able to train people. Then you're also LNT, NMT, massage therapy. So we coach people as our personal training clients or as athletes, but then we also have that switch we can flip where we can actually put hands on them in a therapeutic manual way. And I think that there's this new lane or maybe an increasingly overlapping Venn diagram of therapy and training. So for you, where is that boundary of when am I maybe starting to function more as a physical therapist than I should, which at that point is when you and I would have to know when we're referring out. So what are the sorts of issues that might show up to you where you have to say, I have to refer out? And then what are the issues that are sort of that gray area where it's like, a DPT might usually handle this, but with what I do, I can actually address these in equal or maybe even superior ways than people might be treated at like an insurance-based PT clinic.
Well, I mean, that's super uh, not loaded question. It's a question that comes up often enough. People ask me my opinion on what to do in their careers, and I always have the opinion I can't tell you what to do. Your path is your path. So what's the things that for answer the first question you had about what would I do if there was a certain item or individual presentation that's presented to me, what would I do and how would I deal with it referral wise? I think the handful of things that I've come across with some individuals deals with like the acute stage of things, in the context of somebody came in the other week or month with like very tender palpation and they had some tenderness along their joint line of their knee when they just literally just walking in. It was like very obvious to me, and there was inflammation and it was just like very tender. They came wobbling in more or less, and I'm like, what can I do for you? And they were like, yeah, I have a knee problem. And then the long story short was I basically told them after some very uh gentle range of motion, passive range of motion at that, there was pain even with passive range of motion. I said, you got to go somewhere else. You can't come here. You got to go get whatever you got to get done, x-rays, scans, and so on. Like that was just an easy kind of like, you got to go somewhere else referral thought process. So that when that's acute, it was like very recent of an injury, that sort of thing. It just seemed very obvious to me that, okay, this is going to be bigger problems. The other thing I wanted to point out is with physical therapy, you can do other things. To my knowledge, this is an interesting topic because I don't think other people know this, what PTs can do. It's not just, and I'm strictly talking like what physical therapists can do. Like, don't get that twisted. I'm trying to be very succinct and explicit with my words. You can do wound care management. Like you can literally, if somebody is having some sort of wound problem, like an open wound, for example, or any type of open or avulsion fracture, et cetera, you can do some sort of emergency care. Like that, if you have the right certifications and you paid attention enough in classes or you're taking the right things, you can do that. Definitely not the realm of massage therapists. You can also do, if you are within the, how do you say, the military branches of physical therapy, you can order and deliver if I'm correct, I could be incorrect with this, but I'm pretty sure you can order it at least, X-rays and MRIs. And I think you can also do certain cortisol shots, if I'm correct.
Okay.
Definitely not something that I can do. So that's like, there's clear lines, right? There's clear lines, right? You can do certain manipulations as well. That's another thing, right? There's what's the phrase? It's HVLA, high velocity, low amplitude thrusts. Like that's certainly something that you can do within a certain boundaries and regulations of your state to do this thing. And you can also do dry needling. So what I'm saying is there's modalities that you can do as a PT. Okay.
So as a massage therapist, do people ask you to crack their necks or if you can dry needle them? Yeah. People ask me all the time and I'm like, no, can't. Like that's one of those clear black and white. You cannot come to me for this. Here's my guy. Here's my lady. Go to them. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. I mean, you understand where I'm coming from. There are clear lines of what we can and cannot do. And I think that makes sense. So,
But now for the more interesting gray areas, because what I see, and also I'm in Alabama and you are in Massachusetts. So it'll also be interesting as we go back and forth to see the Northeast versus the Deep South. A lot of cultural differences, not necessarily better or worse in any way, but it'll be interesting to see how those cultural differences have made their way into medical practice and maybe how certain professionals are received. And then what sort of doors that allows you, like kind of your entry points for how you can acquire clients. But what I see in Alabama is a lot of what I saw happening like from a distance in California like 10 years ago. It's a lot of moving away from modality-based physical therapy, where it's basically, a quad massage for a half hour if you have a knee injury, into more of the barbell rehab, where you have a lot of these younger DPTs who, just to tell you what some of them have shared with me is like, I learned a lot of like yellow band and ultrasound in PT school, and then I wasn't really getting people better. And when I started strength training my clients, I got better results than a lot of the therapeutic modalities that I was taught in school. And so now what I'm starting to see is a lot of DPTs who then went CSCS, but 95% of the work they do is really basic like CSCS CPT work. So I don't know, share with me what that landscape looks like where you are and how you interact with the PTs who are much more therapy based, the PTs who are kind of just functioning as strength and conditioning coaches at this point. And at some point, I'm sure we'll get to the guys like Loke over in Pasadena, because there's that breed of physical therapist, which I wish there were more of. Tell me what that landscape is like in Boston and how you fit into it.
Well, I mean, that's a thing that you see, because all you got to do is browse anywhere online and you see physical therapists. Let me put it like this: if you look anywhere online, do you even see physical therapists doing something that looks like physical therapy? And that's a simple question. Like, do you see anyone, like 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to see somebody who these individuals will go to a lifting modality like pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's not wrong, right? Like we have this kind of obesity epidemic. We have this, 78% of Americans are not physically active, whatever those guidelines are, right? It's, I think 3 to 5 times of 60 minutes of working out a week and this and that. And yes, I get it. But what we need to understand is what is the thing that you do, whatever your title is. Are you expressing it? Are you displaying it? If you have a social media presence, or even if you don't, if you just don't even do anything, are you expressing it to your population into the best capacity or best expression of what you do to the best of that ability? Basically, do people think of you, that practitioner, as somebody who lifts, somebody who does some type of modalities, right? Like ART. I've had so many people say, I have a PT who does, I have a handful of athletes still. They have a chiro that they see. They have a physical therapist that does ART, and it could be a chiro that does it also. They have a massage therapist. They have an acupuncturist. They have so many people, right? Like, so I mean, it's definitely a biased small lens that you and I have, because when we actually look and try to like break open this kind of keyhole, we look at what's going on in the whole landscape of everything, whether or not it's Boston or Alabama. Individuals are kind of doing everything. Now, what we see is a small fraction of these things, because we probably have similar, what's the word, like 6 degrees of so on and so forth. And then everybody's trying to do something that involves lifting. That's what we probably see. Yes.
Yeah.
And then it does happen in Boston, to come back to your point, right? It does happen in Boston. PTs are always going back to some sort of lifting program, whether or not you're doing barbell rehab or anything like that. Like, I mean, that's a prevalence that comes out of doing, the mainstream kind of lifting thought process of like somebody, oh, I used to do CrossFit, or I used to do powerlifting, I used to do this. And then they just want to do it for health purposes. So, I mean, there needs to be a link that eventually gets these individuals back to that activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Runner's going to run, lifter's going to lift, golfer's going to golf, so it's kind of whatever we have our predisposition for, what we expose ourselves to. If you look at look at your search feed on your Instagram, my search feed is like basketball, dogs, and like cartoon stuff, like that's basically what all mine comes down to. Like I have
big anime guy.
Yeah. It's just like stuff that I'm interested in. I mean, I have lifting stuff too, obviously, but like not probably to the extent that other people do. So I mean, it is a thing, right? It is a thing. Barbell rehab is prevalent no matter where you are, whether it's Boston, Alabama, or California. So
yeah, okay. So with that, obviously we've talked about your PT, your LMT, your CSCS, or whatever, and if you go, of course, not all of them are created equal. It's like I think people are starting to grasp that the baseline credentialing really is the baseline. Like it is baseline competence and legality. But with baseline competence and legality, you can just plug into an insurance mill and collect a salary and really never learn another thing and comfortably treat 20 people a day, 4 people in an hour. And I've been that tech who's, getting paid over the summer, $8.25 an hour, running back and forth between 3 of the PT's patients, where I have him on a yellow band, I have him on a hamstring stretch. Oh shoot, I got to change the laundry before their timers go off. So that is kind of to me, that's the baseline standard mainstream quality of care that most people receive in what should be the most prestigious physio environment that they have access to. So I fortunately, one, that's an environment that failed me miserably. I was a kicker and punter from age 11, and I had a hip injury in my junior year of high school. It was actually on this is where it'll be interesting to talk about some of the PRI stuff as it relates to kicking. I'm a lefty, big time swing phase on my left side, exacerbated with actually swinging my leg to kick a football. And then stance phase planting on my right, just doubling down on that being buried in right side. I actually injured my plant hip. Yeah, I injured my plant hip. Like a bomb went off in my iliacus. And I didn't know what that word was at the time. And apparently none of the professionals I worked with either, because I had to learn this stuff for myself.
For sure.
My MD told me rest and ice the hell out of it. And then I had a bunch of modality based PT, which would give me just enough of an analgesic effect that I could kind of limp through games on Friday nights. So once I got a little bit better, managed to survive college, then I started learning about people like Dre Spina, and then Ron Hureska, and then Loke out in Pasadena. And I was like, these are different people, and they're getting superior outcomes. And the things they say, I don't know exactly what they mean for me because I'm just an undereducated personal trainer and massage therapist, but somehow they speak to me and to my issues in ways that a lot of the mainstream stuff did not. And if it's happening for me, how many other people are slipping through those mainstream cracks? So now I want to move more into the PRI, the FRS. Obviously, those are kind of the systems or the brands. People get into like there are principles over systems and all this. We just know that PRI and FRS are the two systems, the two expressions of principles that you and I have at least publicly gravitated toward and tend to share our work within. Not to say that nothing exists outside those things.
Right.
So if there are those mainstream cracks that people fall through from a PRI and an FRS perspective, where have you had success with people where other things have failed?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest commonality here is I'll before I say anything that involves certain terminologies, I'll preface it by saying if individuals can get a more individualized and specific look at what is going on, that is the mark in my head of what a good clinician and practitioner can do. So you don't have to have these specific acronyms behind your name.
Right.
I've had this conversation on a handful of different podcasts, but at its simplest, if you as an individual can empathize with the person that's in front of you, whether or not it's digital or not, if you can empathize with the individual's problems, listen, and then calling upon your own understanding of the body and knowledge of the body, deliver a certain output or a certain treatment modality to change and have an outcome or a certain output again, that is really the biggest thing. You can't quite get change without having that understanding. Because if we were to do a random control or randomized group of modalities, and 9 times out of 10 this one thing works, like that would be more superior. That would be a superior thing. But if we are trying to just understand what is really the thing that drives more change and more behavioral change and more improvements, I'd say it begins with understanding what the individual in front of you, the practitioner in front of the client or the patient, that is the biggest thing. That is the biggest thing, because there are so many other psychological things that come into it. There's so many markers, and there's so many nuanced and subconscious things is really where I'm going with it, that will begin to let a person mentally and emotionally begin to change. That's big piece number one. We can think of that as like placebo. It's like, you ever hear somebody doing a ultrasound and the machine's not even turned on and say, oh, I feel better. And then they walk out, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you've experienced that or seen it or heard other PTs talking about it, like they forgot to plug the machine in kind of thing.
Yeah. I tell people when they ask, like the really like pretentious evidence-based people who need a double-blind, controlled study for like to scratch their neck. Oh, I scratched my neck. Was that just placebo? Should I be scratching my neck? Do I have a study on whether neck scratching is effective to alleviate scratch sensation? This is something this is something I just believe. I don't have any double-blind study on it. Sure. That no matter what you do, it can be the most off-the-wall thing or it can be the most evidence-based thing. It will work for 15 to 20% of people who have sought you out to solve an issue.
Right.
Doesn't matter what it is. So there's like a floor of 20% effectiveness, right, that it doesn't matter what you do. So I always try to keep that in mind when we dive really deep into like the science and everything. And then kind of you said, well, if it works 9 out of 10 times, that's good. Well, if it works 2 out of 10 times, like praise the Lord for those 2, right? And I can't dismiss that isn't something that is nothing more than a placebo. But then it's like, well, what if I find a placebo that works 80% of the time, something that's categorically placebo?
Yeah,
I'm gonna work that placebo like crazy, because the people we work with don't actually care. It's more about what are the outcomes you're getting, and is that outcome from a how evidence-based, how much correlation or causation can you attribute to the input to the outcome? That's where I try to not be too judgmental if people are getting solid outcomes.
Right. So the thing that I just don't want to be overshadowed is, yes, there's different, sham protocols or sham surgeries that show that somebody feels better after they receive the surgery, but in reality they didn't receive any surgery at all, or even double blind studies, et cetera, et cetera. I think the one thing that I'm trying to convey is you can't deliver any of these modalities or even surgeries, et cetera, without somebody interacting with another practitioner. Like the patient or client can't begin receiving treatment. Like you can't receive treatment from a machine.
Yeah.
And then like that's a thing that just gets you better, because then that would be like if you're just receiving a blood transfusion and you're not interacting with anyone, that would be completely different. Versus like this is a modality that begins healing, whether it's ART, PRI, FR, like any of these things. That's where I'm going, because if there's an individual that's in front of you, you're going to already begin the process. Like the inkling of it will begin to start to change immediately. So that's that's just like a big thing that I'm trying to get across here.
So like just as there is a dialectical learning process cognitively, there is a dialectical learning process biologically or physically. It's not just I'm in a lecture hall and we're bouncing ideas back and forth with my professor, and I'll get into my philosophy stuff here. Like we have the thesis and the antithesis, or the antithesis, and we create the synthesis. Like that applies to physical interaction with the body in front of you.
Right. And where I'm going with that is that's exactly it. You have this interaction. That's where I'm coming from. You've had individuals that have had bigger, say that they have this thought process that I need this specific thing.
Yeah.
And they come to you, say, I want this stretch, etc., whatever it is. But then, in your head, it's like, I don't think you need that, but you haven't said it out loud yet. And then you start doing something else. It's like, yeah, we're going to get to that. But the thing that you did, you haven't really named it. You just said, we're going to do this thing. And then you haven't even done the things. Like, how do you feel now? It's like, oh, I feel better. Does that make sense? Like the this person wanted a certain modality. We'll call it X, but you have Y. You haven't told them that it's not going to be X, but you just continue with Y and say, oh, I feel better now. It's like, okay, cool. Let's move on.
Yeah. And this is where I'll see people who are so married to that evidence-based rigidity that it becomes a barrier, because they feel the need to explain to their clients up front that you don't actually need X and I have Y and you need Y, but it totally discounts kind of that, like that clearing of negative energy, or that relationship building to come into a fluid dialectical process. It's like, I have to set a stage of relationship so that your nervous system is willing to receive what this human is telling you that it might benefit from.
Right. Yeah. That's basically it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where. Go
ahead.
Oh, so go on. You got it.
I mean, I didn't really answer your question of, I forget the original question that you had about.
So did I.
I think you might have asked something like, what are the unique things that PRI and FRS can kind of bring?
Yeah.
Right. It's something along those lines, right?
Yeah. When I think that, what we just talked about is one of those things, because you cannot do PRI and you cannot do FRS justice with 4 people at a time cycling through on timers.
Well, that's not going to happen.
Like the systems themselves, if you're going to follow them, require that you have that one-on-one time. So it's sort of that assumption is sort of baked into the application, which is might be more powerful than the actual science behind each system that we might want to appeal to. That could be the most important thing that FRS and PRI get into the ethos of therapy and training, that you spend one-on-one time with people versus cycling them through timers.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That's basically what it comes out. Like you can't have 5. Imagine you're trying to actually receive, like mental health therapy or whatever it may be, and you have like, oh, I have a group of 5 people. Is that all right? Yeah. And it's like, no, that's not all right. So maybe that's a group session, and then half the time there's one person talking. It's really tough. So next to impossible. So
and then you'll have people who come in there just with some sort of issue, and they know what they need. Like, oh, I need a hamstring stretch, and sometimes I'm like, you don't need a hamstring stretch. Like, you need to not hate your father. You have because as a massage therapist, like, people talk. Once you have hands on them, that creates one of the safest environments for people to open up. So what I've found is I have some people who will just seek me out for Swedish relaxation massage therapy, and that hands-on interaction creates trust that opens up a window for the other stuff that I might know they actually need, versus I'll throw my elbow in your hamstring today, but I know that you won't feel that great in 2 hours. But if I can set a foundation of trust in the session, then I can segue you into my restorative exercise program, or however you want to brand that type of stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So I think we've done a good job on kind of like 30,000 foot stuff. So if you're cool with it, let's dive into, hey, how are you using this technique, or how are you using this input to create adaptation in a certain client or a certain athlete? So initially it is sort of, I was kind of flattered when you started messaging me about FRS, just because when I give a little background, that at the FR seminar at Loke's clinic in Pasadena, I guess you and Loke had talked prior to that and set up something to where you were actually treating him through the PRI lens, as you were more advanced in that than he was maybe just getting started. And I knew Loke was brilliant, and based on kind of our conversation at lunch and how I botched that question response, I was like, all right, this dude knows a lot that I don't, and he's about to work with Loke, who is someone who certainly knows a lot more than I don't. I'm just going to sit here until they tell me to leave. And it was 60, 90 minutes. Like, it was not a short time that y'all were working together after the seminar was over. And I had no category for anything regarding PRI except what PRI stands for. Like, adduction drop test, or left AIC. Y'all are dropping all these terms, and I was like, this means nothing to me, but I think it will one day. So I was very thankful, one, that y'all didn't kick me out of the clinic and allow me to just immerse in that process, even though I had no idea what was going on. So I was really flattered when you started messaging me about my experience at the FRS internal strength model seminar, because I was like, this dude is way smarter than I am. He's been doing this stuff so much longer than I am, and he's actually asking me a question about something professionally. And so, I'm glad that we were able to connect, kind of where my entry point was FRS, your entry point was PRI, and now you've started integrating more FRS, and obviously I'm getting more into PRI. So let's move more into this will be less of the Gen Pop conversation and more of the provider conversation.
Sure.
What is different about FRS and PRI? I'll rephrase this. Where do FRS and PRI speak the same language? And where do FRS and PRI speak different languages?
The first part is basically it has to do with neurology. Neurology, I'd say histology is where things kind of diverge. Okay. PRI doesn't talk about histology or cellular adaptations and things like that. They probably could, but they just don't even spend time there at all. Okay. Neurology, the neuroscience of it. You've taken one course?
I just finished my second. So I've gone
Cool.
through myokin and pelvis.
So something that 99.9% of people don't do who have just taken a course, other than reread their course manual, which is number one, is look at the resources in the back of the manual. And you'll start to see a lot of commonality in the resources available. You'll see a lot of the commonality of the different, pelvic versus myokinematic manuals. You'll see a lot of commonalities there, obviously, because it has to deal with more or less the lower extremity, right? The pelvis, femurs, etc. That's more from the osteokinematic side of things. That's a big part there. The main thing that I'm talking about is the neuroscience side of it. You'll see a lot of neuroscience and neurology as it relates to systems of how the brain interprets information. And you'll see that ad nauseum across all of the manuals in the resource section. Like if you literally just take all the manuals and just like look at the resources, like if we had some next level, matrix like screens coming here and there, you could just like get this manual, look at the resources, and then just like, what are the commonalities, pull them down, and then say, okay, I need to buy this book because this book has been in 6 out of the 8 courses that I've taken. I'm going to buy this book because this is something that's been there. So clearly it's important if it's in 6 out of the 8 manuals that I've taken courses for so far in my career, right?
Yeah.
So it has to deal with neuro. And then,
so are you saying that those were sources common to multiple PRI courses, or those were sources common to both PRI and F? Okay.
First one.
Okay.
But,
Gotcha.
But I've read and I've listened to, how many lectures there are now from Chivers and Dre alone. Like they've talked so much about neurology and what it means for the dendrites of this and that, and the histology of this and that. So you start to understand, like, okay, there's something here. And every time I see them, I literally ask them, like, what are your resources? And they always just say, like, oh, it's this and it's that. It's like, no, like, what are your resources? So you start to look it up, and then there are commonalities with what they're talking about, because at its simplest, the milliseconds that an action potential can have, it's come from a single, it's not singular, but it's come from a certain source. It's come from a certain individuals. And then it's like, oh, like now, like we understand what it means for a certain cell or a certain organism to retain memory of a movement behavior. That has nothing to do with here. Like this is like the small like amoeba of a slug has a memory of what it means to find food. So if that changes, that's movement behavior. And I think if using that phrase, that's common to you from internal strength model. Yes. Strength is a behavior. Yes.
Yes.
But we can
an emergent behavior. That's what they say. An emergent behavior. That's their big term. Yeah.
A little organism wants food. Is that not the emergence of finding more food? Right. That's very straightforward. Then because of that, we can understand this is found in a certain book. And that's in some of the neuroscience books that I've read. So it's like, okay, this neuroscience book was found in PRI. This emergent behavior thought process is also found in neuroscience. So that's the commonality. It has to deal with neuroscience. It has nothing to do with acronyms. Like, do you think any of these researchers even care about acronyms? They're trying to find out what is the origin of a cellular organism to retain a memory. Like, do you think they care about what we do in the fitness industry? They have they don't care.
And that's something that Spina and Chivers will I think they'll kind of get worked up about, because they'll be like, people will say, show me your research on Pales Rails. And we're like, Pales Rails is not in PubMed. Like, Pales Rails is our acronym. Now I'll show you research on isometrics. I'll show you research on eccentrics, on concentrics. And I think another reason that maybe you don't get quite as much of the research citation from the FRS camp as you do from the PRI camp is Dre in his very first FRC lecture, which this is also why you're you're really interesting, because your first seminar for FRS was functional range release spine,
Oh
which
yeah.
everyone who had gone through the system at the time told me was the hardest seminar. And then you still never did the OG FRC. You just went straight to FRS-ISM, which
Oh,
is we talked about.
I did that.
You did FRC?
Yeah, I did it 2 weeks ago.
Okay. Oh, okay. So I didn't know you. Okay, it was like, all right, let me crash course this prereq so I can get to there. Yeah. But then I mentioned to you, like, you're almost better off for not really having dived deep into the FRC expression of the system, because transparently in ISM, they're like, we kind of dumbed this down for you. So if you really want to understand why it makes sense, now we're unpacking it in ISM.
And that's why I like ISM more than FRC. So
yeah, like it'll be interesting to see like what actually happens to FRC in the future. I don't know.
well, it's like a 1.0 and then a 2.0. That's
I guess so. Yeah, like they'll do away with it, or I don't know. But with what Dre says in his very first FRC seminar is, this is my reinterpretation of everything.
sure.
He never claims that there's some secret source that he's found no one else has. And I think there's a certain level of like abstract thinking required to grasp that. And so you'll have the people who are like, oh, Dre just does joint circles, or like, oh, Dre is just talking about, oh, it's just isometric. It's like, do wall sits. That's an isometric. But like, to fail to see that, no, this is like an interpretive grid through which to view everything that you're already doing in a more like concept perspective, and more what informs your decision-making process versus do this exercise. I think there's a big disconnect. And so a lot of people dismiss this stuff before it even gets started, just because they're not even capable of that level of conceptual thinking required.
So I think there's to use this phrase from Taleb, there's two black swan events, two very rare opportunities, like a rare opportunity on top of a rare opportunity. Whether, I don't know exactly how Dre and Shivers met. Maybe there's in school. I don't know what exactly how that worked, but that was the first one.
Yeah,
they both met at some point, whether it was before, after, or I don't know, during. Then the next one was either Dre's or both Dre and Shivers combined their ability to create a systematic approach, because keep in mind, Cairo, they came from a Cairo background. They didn't have this thought process of strength training, whether or not it's internal or external strength. They didn't have this originally, but that's why I wanted to take FR spine first, because I knew, like, I've been exposed to FRC. Like, I've worked in facilities that have used it in so many different manners. And
yeah, none of those in Alabama.
yeah,
Yeah,
well, yeah, I assume so, right?
Yeah,
actually, I don't know. There could be one, but we both
well,
know there.
Yeah,
I don't know. But
yeah, I'm sure. I know there's some people, but when it came to like looking locally, I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to actually go to the seminar to learn this stuff.
yeah, and
yeah, continue.
And no, basically what I'm just saying is like the systematic thought process, because they reference system 1 and system 2 thinking quite a bit, right?
Yeah,
thinking fast and slow. So long story short, you need to have those pieces fall into place, or you need to have lightning strike not once but twice, so that you can create this model that is their interpretation. Because I was saying to Dre, I had a opportunity to speak with him for like 2 or 3 minutes at the end of the 2-day seminar in Pittsburgh, where I asked him, like, how did you come up with this stuff? Like I literally said to him, like, I've read this research on post-activation potentiation. I've done presentations. I've read over 100 articles on PAP and all these other assorted things. I've read research on isometrics and things like that. Like, when you really sit down, and like when I've sat down and tried to read, you go on PubMed, and now there's probably a lot more, but at the time, maybe 2016, 17, maybe even earlier, when I wrote a couple articles online about post-activation potentiation, etc., there was probably like 100 something articles. There wasn't a lot. So if you parse it down and you say to yourself, okay, there's only 100 20 articles on post-activation potentiation. There's really not that much. So if that's the case, I'm like, what's like, how many hours is that in a weekend? Like, let me just read 50 of them, save the next 50 for the next weekend. And I basically read all the articles currently available on PubMed about post-activation potentiation. So I was saying to Dre, I was like, I've read just about every article on post-activation potentiation. I would not have come up with this systemized way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was trying to get across. Like I said to him, I might get to this system about 4 or 5 years from now, if you give me more time, basically, right? Like 2022, then you say, okay, by 2027, I'm going to get to this thought process eventually by getting there. But he did it already in 2011, 12, right? So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
That's where I'm coming from. Because he has this ability. There's 2 black swan events, again, meeting Chivers and then also creating this system, whether or not those things happen simultaneously. Those things were the most interesting that I found when I spoke with Dre about these items, right?
Mm-hmm.
The FR ISM model or any of the other coursework that we've done.
Yeah, and this is why I get frustrated with kind of like the principles over systems cry, because it's like you have to appreciate brilliance. Like Dre, the end game of Spina and Chivers' work is not that, oh, well, we found out you can just barbell squat people all along. Like right. if you get into that world and you walk away with like, oh, they're just kind of saying the same thing in a different way. Like, have you taught to Spina? Have you taught to Chivers? Whenever I start to get cocky, I just watch a Chivers lecture from my members area. I'm like, oh, I know nothing. These people are so much smarter than I am. I don't know a single thing whatsoever.
I've read a handful of the books that Chivers is referencing. Like, oh, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm like, I watch Chivers to remind myself how little I don't know. And you're like, I watch Chivers to find out what I'm going to read next.
Yeah. Well, I've already read those things. That's a cool thing because
I watch Chivers to see if he references something I haven't read.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because and I don't know if I mentioned it I had a recap of my thought process behind the internal strength model, and I'll probably hit them up at some point now. Not that it's going to be I'm saying anything behind their backs, but they reference going back to we'll talk about ISM, I guess, for right now. Mm-hmm. The easy thing to talk about is it's an internal strength model. And if I think they can even change the word strength model because what I'm saying here is the internal strength model is merely a reaction. The name itself is reactive. You can name it whatever you want. You don't have to name it internal strength model. Like it's your own thing. Like you don't have to say, does that make sense? Mike?
And it's probably their best attempt to condescend to everyone who at least needs. They just give the peons one word that they know, and that might get them in the door, right? So you can name it. But yeah,
you can name it internal training model. Like it doesn't have to have the word strength.
I mean, you could like the emergent behavior model, something like that.
Right? Yeah, 100%. Right. So that's exactly it. No, that would be a great name. But where I'm coming from is that right there, the phrase, not that it's a bad thing. Where I'm going with this is behavior will elicit certain things. It's called an attractor state. I don't know if you recall this. There was a certain wells or certain curves of a bell curve that Chivers was talking about. You might have watched it so many months ago at this point for you, but
of the 12 hours of lectures that they gave us before the actual seminar.
It's 24 hours, but yes,
20. Okay,
that's what they mentioned.
I clearly didn't get through all of them before the seminar.
Right. So long story short, imagine a well, right? It's like you have one end here, another end here, and then in the middle is this deep curve, or it could be shallow. So behavior, it can be a very novice behavior. What's something that you've never done in your life? Have you ever skateboarded or surfed or skied, right?
No.
I've skateboarded, but I never surfed. I've never skied. So surfing and skiing would be very shallow of a behavior. Like I have no practice. I've never done it.
Mm-hmm.
You tell me that there's some elements of skateboarding involved, right? Balancing, you have this kind of like sideways motions of a balance in terms of what's not surfing. What's the phrase? What's the Olympic? I can't. My brain's not working right now. But surfing, you have this sideways motion that you're standing on top of the board.
Mm-hmm.
That is a bit deeper of a well for me because I've skateboarded in my past. And then on top of that, you can say, okay, now since you've done something like it before, but that was so many years ago, now that depth has been reduced. Okay,
Yeah.
so that is an emergent behavior because when you did it, it was fun. It emerges because you have this response chemically. You enjoy what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's this joy that happens with it. So where I'm going with this is, if we're talking about that is a response to the environment, right? If you live in an area that has no concrete or you have no hills, you're not going to be skateboarding.
Yeah.
You're not going to do anything. You're going to be walking and biking and all that, right? You're going to be running.
Yeah.
So if you've never experienced it, you can't experience it. So where I'm going with this is, why call it strength model? Number one, you can call it whatever else you want to call it. And then on top of that, the emergent behavior side of things, the attractor well, that's what it's phrased as, or attractor state. We can now say with some confidence that with more practice, the deeper your well is going to be. So now let's talk about sports. If you have a certain behavior in your sporting specific skills, right? If you're throwing, you're going to throw a specific way. If you're kicking, you're going to kick a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
It's strange that you're a lefty kicker, right? How many lefty kickers are there? There's probably not that many, right?
Very few. David Akers.
There you go. Perfect.
David Akers. He's the guy.
There you go. Yeah. Eagles. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. How many of them are there, right? You know of one. You're probably like one other one that you're probably not thinking of right now. But other than that, so that's the thing. Like sports specific movements will have certain behaviors. That's why I don't think strength model is the right phrase. And that, it's not mine. Obviously they make more. I paid them. So it's like, whatever they want to call it, I'll take it, whatever.
Yeah.
But, if you want to call it an internal behavior model, that might be a little bit more appetizing.
Okay.
So you don't get stuck to this strength and conditioning mindset.
Yeah. Cause when you start talking about like the slow twitch, not to failure. And like a lot of those don't map into a traditional understanding of strength. Or like when I'm thinking of like connected tissue quality, like connected tissue rigidity, that kind of maps to strength. But like when we're looking at connected tissue quality, you could argue that like super flexible people have high connected tissue quality because they have great extensibility, but like that wouldn't really be, but they're not really strong people a lot of the times. Like my wife's a yoga instructor. Right. She's gotten a lot stronger since she's gotten married to me, but she would have been one of those people who's like, when Dre talks about those buckets, she and I are very opposite because I have that football kind of power sport background where, very, very, high force output, blew out my joints because my muscles had too much juice in them. Whereas she is super flexible, but has very low force production. So it's when you kind of, those four buckets that I think it was four or however many buckets that they talk about, where you pour the tube, that was massive for me to just start kind of, where are people's buckets? And, if I have a yoga instructor and I have a football player, I kind of know what inputs they're already really good with and what inputs they have deficits with. And that's sort of a starting place, a safe starting place that's going to guide what the session is probably going to look like. Yeah. But none of it's necessarily like strength training.
Right. And that has more to deal with background, right? That has more to deal with background and behavior in that background. The information that you just spoke about is not only privy to what Dre has been exposed to, because Dre comes from the background of whatever the research is saying. So if you've read the accompanying research, you are familiar with what the tendinous research is talking about. You understand what the connective tissue research is talking about. I've actually heard other practitioners talk about this. I listened to a video, I could forward it to you later, of one practitioner talking about what connective tissue length and how that whether or not it's greater or less length, but the tensegrity of it, if you will, if you want to use specific words, how the tensegrity of a certain length can deliver or not deliver more force output, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have some weaknesses based on where you're at. And then that's basically the whole internal strength model's thought process. Is I think that kind of resonates with you, because I just wanted to get that point across. It's not just it's not just Dre. Other research and other items speak about this, but it just, that's what you've been exposed to. And it's not a bad thing. It's good to get information from somewhere. I'm sure you're not just sticking to PubMed 100% of your day. I used to do that, but now it's like, okay, just do some other stuff and get information from someone. So
and like you said, it's Dre, kind of the second black swan event is that they have been able to package this in a way that's digestible for a CPT with a liberal arts degree to actually get great client outcomes. So even for the person who like, look, I don't read nearly as much research as you do. I can sort of outsource my research filter to people like Dre, Chivers, Haruska, and then say, hey, well, what are they saying? And kind of an argument from authority, like they're smart, they're trustworthy. I'm going to listen to what they say about this. And then obviously you don't want to create that echo chamber, but at some point, like you can't read everything on PubMed. And even if I'm not even qualified to interpret everything I read, even if I were to make all that.
Yeah.
So, just getting those different perspectives and then tying it back to the very first thing we said is, well, what do I have to offer uniquely with the person in front of me? Like, what if, what if like Dre's personality rubs someone the wrong way?
100%.
Like I can get better outcomes with a client than Dre Spina because maybe we just vibed like energetically. So it's, and just, hey, this guy's a great system. He's organized in a knowledge, but now I think a challenge for a lot of FRS people, and like, look, I have the Control Yourself t-shirts, like they branded me. I gave them a lot of free marketing. But I think especially early on, a lot of the FRS people struggle with, I am doing FRS versus I am giving my client what my client needs. If it's an overweight client, like, hey, let's like get you moving and maybe I'll teach you some cars. But if you're grossly overweight and you're missing 5 degrees of shoulder IR, I'm probably just going to choose a different exercise versus taking 10 minutes of your session to Pales Rail shoulder IR. So I think that's a gap to bridge with the people who attend the seminar and then make their way back to their clients on Monday morning.
I think a cool segue that you didn't intend with that last comment about, if somebody who just happens to be overweight, systematically, this is an interesting thought process. This is where I'm thinking sometimes. If an individual, whatever we want to call it categorically, whatever we're calling obese or overweight nowadays, if an individual is presenting as PEC, they have a lack of shoulder IR, and then they also happen to be 20, 30, 40 pounds, if not more, overweight. The most interesting thing is, what do you look at first? They complain of shoulder or back tightness. You know that they have certain presentations based on whatever acronyms you're looking at, but you also know that they have, something going on in the context of the eating habits.
Yeah.
So it's like, where do you start?
Yeah.
And then where do you also end the session? So the interesting thing is, if not that I've systematically think like this for every individual I work with, but something that you can do is allow this individual or guide this individual to have better eating habits, so that eventually the mass that they have will begin to reduce the amount of stress on their spine, so then they're no longer pitching forward. Because if they are pitching forward, their whole system is going into an extended state. And if they are in an extended state, that means they are losing orthopedic and they're losing range of motion somewhere.
Yeah.
So if we can allow them to, do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
And systematic, if we can get that, good.
And we're starting to go into to the PRI, and we're going to have to do this again because I feel like we just kind of got started with more the interesting professional like provider side of things.
Sure.
So we'll have to do another one with having a little more of a PRI bias in mind for that conversation.
Yeah.
But Miguel, we are running out of time.
No worries.
What has been your favorite part of this interview?
Even just speaking about a little bit of the sports related things, that little bit that we spoke about. I think, we could definitely talk more about sports related items. With respect to PRI, I've worked with a lot of baseball guys too, so we can talk about that as well. So
awesome. You bring the pitchers, I'll bring the kickers. I'll see you next time.